I colon 1/20? How would you specify the proximity?
We'll just call it prox for right now.
Okay.
It's 1/3, but we'll just call it prox.
Okay, yeah, then prox
You just want prox?
is off.
Good. So you want the inverse of prox.
Inverse of prox, is that what the
That's what the prime means.
Prime, okay.
Because I don't have a way to put a bar over
bar,
it.
okay, I see what you're saying, okay.
Okay, so what have we just done? We said 1 and 1 and the inverse of 0. So we managed to get a 1 into B1. That's going to keep us in the get box state. We've calculated the null transition. That's what this is doing. See? Good. Let's go over here to this stop transition. And what are we trying to do? Well, I guess I should ask Mr. Shalosky. I'm going to ask each student now for a couple of terms, probably 3 or so.
B0 equals B1 and stop push button and prox.
Okay? So that's the expression that you want.
Yeah.
Okay. What we're going to do now, we're going to change the rules just a little bit. And I'm going to let the next student decide if the previous student's answer was right or wrong. If it's right, just go on to the next thing. If you think there's some problem with it, then tell me what you think you should change. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with what Mr. Shalosky said. I'm just changing the rules a little bit. More terms,
Do
more
I have
opportunity.
the inverse on the push button?
There you go, very good. There actually was something wrong. What you're saying is, wait a second, stop is actually off, right? So when stop is off, I need to invert it. Prox is on. So if I'm in the get box state and the stop button is not pushed and the proximity sensor is true, I'm sorry, actually, the stop button, push button is pushed. Okay. Then what do I want to do? I want to go to the stop state. So I'm going to calculate stop state true. That's what this will do. I'm in get box, true. Stop push button is giving me a 0, indicating that the button is pushed in. So the inverse of 0 is true. So true and true is true. And prox, well, prox indicates that there's a box in position. Of course, that doesn't really matter because I'm going to go to the stop state. So true and true and true is true, and that'll move us to the stop state. Good. Mr. Collinwood, is there anything wrong with that, or do you want to move on to the next one?
I think we can move on.
I think so. Okay. So how do I begin this, and then give me a couple of terms?
Let's begin with B1.
You're saying the expression, I'm saying, what do we want to calculate here? What state bit are we trying to turn on? Let me go over here where you can see them.
Oh, aren't we trying to turn on fill box?
We are, so how would I turn on fill box?
B2
Good.
and equals prox and stop PB. And that's as far as I'm thinking.
As far as you're thinking? Okay, all right. Ms. Weigel, do you want to make a correction or move on to something else?
You did and B2.
Do we need to and with B2? So you're saying let's put an and in right here, I guess? Okay. All right, let's see. Is that, so you think that completes the expression then? Or is there something else to add? I'm trying to give away less hints now.
And I think the stop needs to be inversed.
You think the stop needs to be inverted? Okay.
No, never mind.
No? Okay. So you think it's good now or no?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
good.
All right, Mr. De Benedetto, do you think there's a correction or shall we move on? What do you think?
What is the goal that we're trying to do?
What we're trying to do is turn on B2 so that we can get to the fill box state. If we're in the get box state and the stop push button is not pressed, and prox is true. So we're trying to set up an expression that says, are we in the get box state? Is prox true, and is the stop push button not pressed? In other words, is the stop push button true? Let me read it in English. I want to go to the fill box state if I'm in the get box state, and there's a box in place, and the stop push button is not pressed. Does this say that? If so, we can move on to the next expression. If not, what would you suggest?
So B2 represents fill box state.
Correct.
So then the right side of the equal sign where it says B2 should say B1.
That's exactly right. Because the condition that we're testing there is, are we in the get box state? You see? See how that's our condition? That's our first condition on all the expressions. Again, this little thing here, this B1, prevents these equations from being active if we're not in the get box state. These expressions should only have some effect when we're in the get box state already. Okay? Or have an effect of turning on, I should say. Notice we started these expressions with B0. So the expressions always begin with the current state bit. Make sense? Good correction. Okay, let me go on to the next state to program, which is the fill box state. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. So hopefully we can have more of this on the screen at once. The next state of interest is the fill box state. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, here we go. Okay, now Mr. Christie, what bit is on when I'm in the fill box state?
B0/2.
Okay. Mr. Shepherd, what conditions will allow me to transition out of the fill box state? Not the null transition, but
If-
what conditions are there?
There's the stop being
There's a stop push
pressed,
button, and
our prox or level sensor
level
being
sensor.
on.
Right. So those two things, level, try to speed up just a little bit. Level and stop are the two things that will allow us to transition out of the fill box state. Right? Okay. So now, let's see, Mr. Collingwood. If I am in the fill box state and I see that the stop push button is pressed and that the level is not true, that the box is not full, in other words, to which state should I go?
Back to the stop state.
Exactly, I want to go to the stop state. Mr. Shalosky, if I am in the fill box state, you can look at the state transition diagram to figure this out, and level's not true, and stop push button is not being pressed, what state do I want to go to?
Fill box.
I want to stay in the fill box, exactly. Ms. Weigel, if I am in the fill box state, I notice that level is true and the stop push button is not being pressed, to which state do I wish to transition?
Stop.
To the stop state?
You override the level.
Well, remember the stop push button is not being pressed, that's why we've got a 1 on it. Because it's a normally closed switch.
Okay, so just full box.
Full box, exactly. Mr. De Benedito, if the stop push button is pressed and the level sensor is true and I'm in the fill box state, where do I want to go?
Stop.
Okay, so now let's take these conditions, copy them over here. I want you guys to notice something. Did you notice that in the first state we programmed, there was only one possible transition out of it, so there's only one condition to consider? Even if we had a single transition, if there were multiple inputs to consider, we actually have to build a box like this because we have to consider all possible combinations. If you had 3 conditions for taking a transition, now you need this and another one where you've got all 3 variables at all 3, you know, you have 8 different combinations. We've got 4 combinations to decide on here because we only have 2 inputs that are controlling where we go next. In the stop state, we only had 1, so there are only 2 possible places to go. You see? So if there were 3, if on our state transition diagram somewhere where we either had 3 separate transitions, or we had 3 conditions, say on one transition, or 2 transitions where one had 2 conditions and the other one had a single condition, we'd have 8 possible combinations to consider. And we'd have to decide which state to go to based on all possible combinations of those 3 input conditions. So it can become pretty complicated pretty quickly. But for right now, I've tried to design the state transition diagram so that there are only at most 2 conditions for moving out of each state. All right, so where were we? We've decided to which state we should go based on the inputs.